watching closely.
What's the secret, Max?
You just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hello, and welcome to The Establishing Shot, a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. I am your host, Eli Price, and we are here on episode 67, taking a short break from our Spielberg series, covering all of his movies at this point. I was kind of used to saying early Spielberg and his movies of the 70s and 80s, but now that we've moved into the next phase, it's kind of, what do you say, the mid-career? I don't know. It's kind of awkward. It's his mid-career, but it's awkward to say. And we're probably just going to keep going with Spielberg. So we're just covering Spielberg at this point. But we're taking a break from that this week. I have Joe George back on with me from our Schindler's List episode last week. We made sure to record a week later and wear the same clothes and look exactly the same. No, we just actually recorded that, and now we're recording this one. But yeah, George is Joe. I said George. You do have two first names, so that's fair. Joe, it's great to have you back. I really enjoyed and got a lot of our conversation on Schindler's List. And I hope everyone else did too. It's a hard thing to talk about. I gotta admit, I was a little bit nervous about it. Like, how do you cover a movie like that and not diminish it? Well, great. Mildly nervous, but yeah, so this week, I figured I would have Joe back on. He has one book out. He has a lot of articles, I would imagine, out there in the interwebs. But he does have one book out. You did send me the book beforehand. I was able to read some of the intro because you only sent it to me a few days ago.
Say, I'm impressed you got that. I was like, I feel like I should send it, but
yeah, I read like half of the introduction. So what I'll be doing is asking you questions to get excited about reading it, and hopefully along with the listeners.
Hopefully I won't dissuade you.
But the book is called this. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't have it right in front of me. The Superheroes and the Glory.
Oh, close. Superpowers in the Glory.
The Superpowers and the Glory.
Yeah.
Draft. I should have pulled it up so I didn't get it wrong. But yeah, rookie mistake.
Equally good name.
Yeah. The Superpowers and the Glory. It is. Remind me what the subtitle is, because I would probably botch that too.
Well, here we go, because I can't remember what the subtitle is. And this is, when you write a book, you don't necessarily get to pick the title. Or
that's true.
With the articles with the headlines. So
yeah.
I think it's A Viewer's Guide to the Theology of Superhero Movies. It's close
that sounds
to that.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. When you say it out loud, I'm like, yes, I remember reading something like that.
Okay, good.
But yeah, it's so, I've mentioned before on the podcast, I'm a Christian, and Joe is as well.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I think is interesting to do personally is to kind of have theological conversations with movies. I've talked about, I don't remember if I've talked on this podcast before. I've talked on another about Robert K. Johnston's book, Real Spirituality, REEL. And that's a big thing that he talks about, is theological conversations with movies. And so that's one thing I find interesting. And obviously Joe does too, because he has a whole book about superhero movies and what they say theologically, or what they how they can inform and come into conversation with your theology in a way, I guess, which I think is a really interesting endeavor and probably not the first thing you would think about for a superhero book, or a book about superhero movies is let's think about this through the lens of theology.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, it's very interesting and intriguing to me. But I wanted to kind of go back to maybe the beginning for you as a writer. What is do you remember like choosing to be a writer at some point in your life? Was there like a moment, or like you just have always wanted to write, or is it just kind of like this is where I am now? I don't know how I got here. What's how did you start? What when did you know, I guess, that you wanted to be a writer?
I don't know that there was a time like
Yeah,
up through high school and towards college. I wanted to be an artist, a cartoonist.
sure.
It turns out I'm really bad at that. But I had parents that could pay for art school if I was really set on that, and they wisely dissuaded me from that. And you know what? I guess I can remember. I went to community college for Kalamazoo Valley Community College, and not in Kalamazoo, and strangely, Oshtemo, Michigan. And taking, just like a composition class. I had probably the way that most straight men do things is I wrote something and a pretty girl said it was good. And I thought, well, that hasn't really happened ever since then, but that was enough to spark me into it. And so
It's like you don't say.
yeah, I got nothing else going for me, so we'll do that. And then that was about that. But I went to grad school and was set on teaching for a long time. But this is what people try to tell you before you go to grad school and while you're in grad school, but I didn't listen until after I finished my PhD, is that there's not actually any jobs, not full-time jobs in there. And somehow that went, while I was adjuncting around, started just writing movie reviews and movie articles just for fun, and then that turned into a supplemental income, and somehow that's turned into most of my income. I still adjunct, teach a couple of classes, but most of my income comes from writing now. So that wasn't a very clear answer, but
Yeah,
that was the honest one.
well, it sounds like it all of a sudden happened to you over time.
I mean, yeah, all of a sudden over time. That's actually
All of a sudden over time,
that's exactly.
and now
how
here
it
you
happened.
are.
And now here I am.
Yeah,
We're
and
talking.
you can, when people say, "What do?" you can say, "I'm a writer now." Does it feel weird?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've just started, like, within the last 6 months, being like, I'm a writer, and I also supplement with teaching, or I'm writing, because then they're always like, well, what do you write? Is it, have I read anything? I'm like, no, I wrote about Batman today. You didn't read anything I wrote.
Yeah.
But it's cool. It's weird, but it's cool.
Yeah, so you're really like fresh into describing yourself as a writer, I guess. So that's kind of fun, I guess, is it?
I mean, this is actually the second book that I've published, and I'm just now feeling brave enough. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Imposter syndrome's real, man.
Yeah, it is. When you create something and put it out there, it's kind of like, I don't know, maybe someone will see this, but
nobody has seen it.
So, I don't know.
I got my first royalty check, I can tell you.
Yeah.
Nobody's seen it. But
Well, I make no money doing this, so
yeah, exactly. It's just shouting into the void, isn't it?
Yes. But I have fun doing it, so
That's exactly right.
yeah. What made you want to write about films in particular?
So, my PhD is in American literature. And my first book was my dissertation. I just turned it into an academic monograph. And so I was writing about literature a lot, and I'm still an avid reader. But here's the thing: even a long movie is like 4 hours long. Even a short book is like 4 hours long.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to just how much you can cover and what you can get out there, it just works out that movies are the thing. And I wish I wrote about literature more than I do, but because this is my job now, it sounds so dumb, but I have to kind of look at the value proposition. And I've been sitting on a week. I got something from my editor at Sojourners who was like, "Hey, are there any books coming up that you want to write on?" And yes, I do, but is it going to be worth it to do I want to turn my reading into work in that way? And if I do that, instead of just reading it because I want to read it, if I do that, is it worth it for what they're going to pay me? You know?
Right.
That sounds so dumb, but when you get lucky enough to turn the things you love into money-making endeavors, then you do have to start thinking about them in that way.
Yeah.
So anyway, the short answer is more people read, more people are interested in movies than they are basically any of the other things that I work with. And I love cinema as well. And this will go into your question about why superheroes, I'm sure. Why would I care that much about it? I'm a firm believer in going where people are at. You know, I do not believe at all in being snotty about. I don't believe in the curatorial sort of approach to art. There are definitely
the canon or whatever.
Canon, exactly right. Like I tell when I teach my literature classes, The Great Gatsby is my favorite book, but I don't have any sort of investment in telling you that you also need to love it. I'm more interested in helping you to express the things that you love. And so so I'm not I sound bitter maybe when I'm talking about, oh, I got to write about movies. No. I love movies, and more so I love engaging with people about how art is affecting them. And right now that's the main way we do storytelling in the United States, and therefore I love it.
Well, I think the best film reviews that I read are ones that not just like not just like the critic telling me what they think about the movie, but in a sense like teaching me how to think about movies.
Exactly.
And so like even if I'm reading something about a movie I didn't like and maybe this critic likes it or vice versa, learning how they think about movies is really cool to me. I get a lot out of it. And I'm not looking for them to tell me if I should like a movie or not so much as, well, how did they watch the movie? What did they get out of it? And it can teach you something about how to watch movies as well, how to engage with the art, whether it be movies, which is I guess the thing that more people are engaged with, or even literature sometimes. I could probably use some help in that area. I don't read as much as I probably should, but this Spielberg series has got me reading more books because I'm trying to read all the movies he's adapted, and he's adapted a good bit of stuff. So
it's then you're in that kind of weird, conversation about adaptations too. Which is fascinating if you can approach it from that perspective of these are two discrete works of art in different media rather. If you try to, I thought the character looked like this and you cast it like this, you're going to drive yourself nuts. And I don't think that's a very useful conversation anyway, really.
Yeah. I get the interesting conversation as far as that goes to me is, well, what was the point of the book, and has the movie like distorted that in some way, and is that okay?
Yeah.
Is
Is
it
That
okay?
is really good.
Is it okay to buy the rights to this, but fundamentally change what it is?
Yeah.
Is that like in the ethics of art? Okay, I guess.
I would argue in almost every case, yes, it is.
That's fair.
Because the original still exists.
That's
You
true.
know,
Yeah.
it's not taken from it. This is we're veering away from literature into this elitist there, but as somebody who writes about nerd stuff a lot, this is the argument that I constantly have with people, especially about superheroes and comic books and that sort of thing.
And what is canon and what is not?
It's not even just I mean, that's a big part of it, but it's
Right.
also, you know, oh, this character had red. Well, a big one is this character is white. In the movie, they're black, you know, and even if that was I mean, sometimes it raises bigger questions that the movie doesn't want to answer, and that's its whole thing. But even if you hated this version, you still have the other. It's still there, you know. You can still go back and read the original. They haven't destroyed it. It's larger for adaptation. Or I mean, we can think about this in literary terms too. Like I said, The Great Gatsby is my favorite book. I don't like any of the movie adaptations, but they are in conversation and they enlarge. Even when I say I don't like the Robert Redford one, I don't like the DiCaprio one because the Redford one's way too boring and the DiCaprio one's way too extravagant. That makes me appreciate the original one more. You know, so. There can
that's
be,
an interesting point. Yeah.
Like I could understand if you were a big Robert Heinlein fan, and you watch Verhoeven's Starship Troopers, and you're like, oh, he hates the book that he's adapting, right? Verhoeven looks at reads Starship Troopers, and says this is a fascist text, and he makes a movie that's all of our heroes are dumb fascists. I can see how that would anger you. But also, that's a valid interpretation of Starship Troopers. It's just that his valid interpretation, instead of writing it on his blog, is a Hollywood blockbuster. But it is still an interpretation. And so you respond to it like any other interpretation.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
I'm
ranting.
No, it's good. This is maybe a taste of what you can expect from a book.
I'm way more coherent. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning right here, and I'm all hopped up on soda. There's a reason I write and not speak. I'm way more coherent in my writing.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's probably most people could be. I don't know. It's probably just a personality thing, but.
Hi. Quick reminder that you, yes, you, can be a huge help to the production of this show. If you visit establishingshotpod.com/donate, you'll find out how to join the Establishing Shot family through some giving tiers starting as low as $5 a month. You heard that right, only $5 a month. And not only will you be helping me keep the show going, but you'll also get some perks yourself, like early and ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, access to a Discord server where we can chat it up about the show and movies in general, and more. Might even let you choose a movie for me to review for the show. Check out that link in the show notes to learn more. Back to the show.
Speaking of interpretation, in the Superpowers and the Glory, you are looking at things and interpreting things through a theological lens.
Yeah.
I guess the most interesting question is, like, how do you personally do that? How do you, like, what do you have a process through which you kind of step by step go through and let the movie, like, do you watch the movie and then bring some theological questions to it? Do you watch the movie and just try to find what might be in there? Like, what's your process of how you bring theology into conversation with a movie, especially like a superhero movie?
Yeah. That's a really good question, because the perhaps unsatisfying answer is I don't have a process.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, criticism and the act of explicating any sort of interpretation is always highly personal. Like I don't, well, I do sometimes often like write a straightforward review that has a star rating at the bottom, and
Sure.
it's saying I like this. What I'm really doing is telling you this is my experience of engaging with this piece of art.
Right.
And that means then, because I am Christian, that I will always look at it through a Christian perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of the stuff I write is political because I am also far leftist, and both of those things, I just reflexively they help me make sense. That's how I'm always looking at the piece. I'm always thinking, it's specifically superhero stories. Most superhero stories are power fantasies with a moral element, fundamental. They can't get around that, and I think it becomes a real problem when they try to pretend it's not. And so that's what they are. And so while I'm watching them or reading them, I'm thinking, what is the moral compass here? How is morality played out? And one of the axes that I'm going to be looking at the morality is are these characters motivated by love and sacrifice and understanding Christian values, or are they operating according to accusation, domination, and oppression? And I don't. I want to make it clear that I don't go to them trying to baptize them.
Yes.
I want them to say what they're saying.
Yes.
And so, it can be. I'm trying to. I mean, Joker was the one that we were talking about before. That's fine. We can look at that. What that movie's saying, the way that I read it, is just total nihilism. That it's garbage upon garbage. I mean, it's literally in that movie. There's a garbage strike happening, and there's trash upon trash. And I don't try to make it. I don't want to make it say anything different. But as a human being, and as a Christian, what does that make me think? And so in my chapter where I'm writing about movies about villains, which is where the first Joker fits in. The book came out last year, so it was before the second one came out. But when I'm looking at that chapter, I'm like, okay, so this movie is all misery, and I don't think I'm doing violence to the text to say that it's about misery. I think that's explicitly what it's about. That's its most coherent. Joker tries to say some other things, but I don't think it's actually interested in them. I think characters spout things off, but then the movie's visual and concerns are just, let's watch miserable people have miserable things happen to one another. And so my question then, as I'm watching it, is I'm thinking, well, this is hell. They're in hell, and so while I'm watching that and articulating, this is what happens when everybody hates one another. It's a miserable experience, and it's an experience of hell. And then I draw in that particular section from Thomas Merton writing about hell in the New Seeds Contemplation, where he's talking about hell not as a not a place of fire with the devil and the pitchfork and all that sort of stuff, but an existential level of accusation and self-loathing. And that's what that movie is. Everybody loathes themselves, and everybody in that movie loathes one another, and that loathing of one another makes them hate one another, right? And so I look at there's no demarcation for me. That's just what I'm thinking of. Now, I don't always articulate it in different contexts. I know, for example, I know sometimes when I'm writing for Christian audiences, not to be like, and then the proletariat will rise up and overthrow the bourgeoisie, because that's going to set off some alarms in people, even though that's what I'm thinking. And vice versa, I know when I'm writing for a leftist organization to say, and we care about the proletariat because they're made in the image of God who will overthrow the oppressor, right? So there are different spaces in which I articulate that, but it's always, all of that stuff's present. And the really nerdy stuff of, well, Joker first debuted in Batman number 1 from 1940, created by Jerry Robinson and Bill Finger. Like, all of that's also happening in my head, too. And there are times when I articulate that part. So that was a long answer to your question, but the short answer is there's no process. It's who I am. And so it's what I'm going to articulate. It's what I'm thinking if I've got space to articulate it.
Yeah. And I think that's good to hear, because I think a lot of times people want to know, how do critics, how do they write about these movies? And really, at the end of the day, what most critics do is they watch the movie, they experience it, and then they go home and they jot some notes down of, this was my experience. How can I turn this into a readable thing? And that maybe might help others process it as I'm processing it through my writing.
That's exactly right.
And I think, I don't know, it is, I guess technically you could say that is a process, but it's really not like a step-by-step thing. It's, and I think the other thing that stuck out to me is we always want to, and I think this, you're talking about it through a theological lens. You're watching the movie, you want to watch the movie and let it say what it's going to say, and not read things into it or watch it in a way where you're looking for one particular thing.
Yes.
So much so that you'll miss everything else. And I think that's important here, because even for listeners that, might not be religious at all, we all have like lenses that we watch things through.
Yep.
And I think it's important to remember when you're engaging with a piece of art, whether it's literature or a film or a painting, you should always do your best. It's impossible to completely look at something without bias, but you should always do your best to be aware of your bias and try to look past that and try to experience something and try to see what it's actually trying to say, instead of just reading your own experience into it, and try to see what it's saying and let it inform that before you, whether it's watching with a theological worldview, or watching with a feminist worldview, or watching with whatever worldview or lens you might watch it through.
Yeah.
You should always let the art speak for itself before you bring that to the table to converse with the movie.
Converse is the key word. It's just like having a conversation with a
person. It is. Yes.
Let them speak.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
I
and listen.
I cut you off.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And I think that's good for everyone to hear. Really, like it's not just something people with a theological lens should do. It's something that everyone should do. And I think I think people would forget that, and I think a lot of times, and a lot of times it goes both ways in culture wars, where you can't make your movie about this because it's just trying to do this, and then the other side is saying the same thing, accusing the other side of the same thing that they're being accused of. It's a mess. But if we take a step back and say, okay, let's just experience the art for what it is, for what it says, come into conversation with it. If you don't like it, you don't like it. That's fine. But let's try to see what it's trying to say, and then, like you said, it's a conversation. Try to come into conversation with it. Let it ask the work of art questions, but also let it ask you questions as well.
Yes.
Very cool. So why, for you, why superheroes specifically? Like, why you're like, I want to write a book. I want it to be about superhero movies.
So the honest answer is that because I love superheroes. I have
That's
been
what
reading
That's what I
superhero
wanted to hear.
Okay, good. I have been reading superhero comics since 1985. So since I was 7 years old.
Mm.
And I had various points throughout my life, tried to be like, whatever. I had my teenage phase where I was like, girls won't like me. Turns out there were other factors that made me unlikable. It wasn't just Batman. But, like I gave it up then. And, when I was studying literature in graduate school, I had a moment where I was like, I cannot, I've got the greats of the Western. I've gotten away from, I love them. I love them dearly. I've been reading them for decades. I continue to read them. I love the genre. I love the characters. I love the conventions of superhero stories. And I especially love them when people let them be what they are, which they are silly stories about people in bright colored costumes doing ridiculous things. And there's pathos and there's morality and philosophy and all of these things that can play out in that while still being stories about silly people that punch one another face in bright colors. And so I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder against, I don't know if you watch, like the Penguin TV show that's out right now.
I haven't watched it.
Geek. Okay. Yeah. It gets better, but the first 3 episodes are very much like, we wish that we were the Sopranos, and so we're going to be a little embarrassed about the fact that this is about a supervillain who wears purple and fights Batman. It's like you can't be the thing that you are. So anyway, I love superheroes, and I'm passionate about them. I have loved them before there was such a thing as the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And, then there's all these hand-wringing about, is the MCU going to die? Yeah, of course, probably, and I'll still love them afterwards, So that's the main reason. However, for a while there, superheroes were extremely popular. And so I thought that I'd have a shot where this is a thing that I care deeply about, and everybody is paying attention to it. This is a chance to, as I said, go where the people are at. It just so happened to be right on that point up until my book came out. and my launch coincided with Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which was the movie where everybody said, we're done with this. So it is,
it's a cruel universe, really.
I mean, it had to happen. It's just the way that it works. It makes me laugh. I enjoyed writing it, but everybody got out of superhero movies the very moment that I jumped in with it. So that's why. So there is that. But the short answer is I love these characters, and I do think they are still rich for this, while also being what they're about. So like, for example, my chapter on Superman, I use that to think about the Odyssey, because on one hand, the Superman movies are about a guy that dresses in blue tights and a cape and says, here I come to save Mighty Mouse. But anyway, flies in and he saves people. But these movies are also about random, horrible things happening randomly to people, because that's the way that the structure works, right?
Right.
In order for Superman to save the day, everybody kind of has to be in
peril.
In danger. Yeah, exactly. And so I use that to kind of think about, okay, what these movies are imagining a world in which bad things happen to random people. Well, why do bad things happen to people? That's the question of the Odyssey, right? Why is there injustice if there is an all-powerful and just God? Also, Superman movies are about basically all-powerful figure who comes and saves the day, except for when those movies aren't about that, which is something I don't think that they're setting out to make this point. I think it's just basic drama. You know,
Yeah.
you can't, if you've got a super invincible guy who never gives anything wrong, then you don't really have any, you know, narrative inertia.
Sure.
Or tension. So a lot of Superman movies have scenes where Superman fails and other people need to pick up the slack. Well, if we're thinking about the Odyssey, if we're thinking about why do bad things happen if there's a just, all-powerful God, one of the answer isn't the right word, but one of the responses to that is, well, it's our job to deal with this. We don't go waiting for God to clean everything up. We are there's a wonderful book by Marianne McCormick called Horrendous Evil and the Goodness of God. And she talks about how what we're doing, one of the jobs of a Christian is not so much to dwell on why God allows evil as much as it is to respond to the evil and be God's spot. You know, that's a specifically Christian way of reading that. And to address that. Well, the Superman movies kind of do that. So what I'm getting at is I think all of that depth is there, even though these are movies about people in bright colors who punch each other.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What as you were working through these movies and writing this book, was there something, because for, like you said, for a long time, this was the culture. What did you notice about these sorts of movies, like maybe a common thread that run through that maybe could inform why it was the culture for a while?
I don't know that we're far enough from that moment to try to make any sort of large things of why that's the culture. You know, I do think there's something to the idea that kind of coming out of the shadow. This is going to sound so pretentious, but just bear with me for a second. Coming out of the shadow of 9/11, the United States in particular wanted more hopeful narratives. You know, for a long time, how many times The Dark Knight is an example of one I've seen in superhero movies where we saw movies that had exploding buildings and morally ambiguous heroes. So by the time we got to the 2010s and the Marvel Cinematic Universe begins in 2008, but Avengers is 2012. By the time we hit that point, we wanted cleaner moral narratives, and superheroes gave us that at least on one level, and the fantasy aspect allowed us to kind of push that off elsewhere, right? It's easier to cheer for Chris Evans as Captain America than it is to deal with the actual quagmires of what the United States is.
Yeah.
And so I do think that there's something to that. That's part of it. You can't separate from the fact, though, that also, the capitalist machine that is Disney, it grew incredibly powerful in the 2010s, and with that much media presence, they were allowed to push their content. But I would also argue that there is something inherently communal in a lot of these stories. The idea of a shared universe kind of pushes through, and my hot take on the Marvel Cinematic Universe is that those movies are essentially friendship movies. Like, the action, if you want action, you can get better action someplace else.
Sure.
If you want drama, you can get better drama someplace else. You can visually, you can definitely get better visuals someplace else. What Marvel offered, and everybody else tries to do as well, is the fun of seeing your friends get together. Like the shawarma scene at the end of Avengers is actually that's the juice that people can't come for, and that's inherently communal, And there was something about the pseudo monoculture that we had, where if I say I am Groot, you know what I mean, and it grew even larger. And so I do think that there's a communal desire that people have.
Yeah.
That for a while, superhero movies met that
Mhm.
desire. And
Yeah.
so many of the movies were about weird communities coming together.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting, I think, too, is it's almost like there was for a bit this kind of missing thing in pop culture that used to be there that you probably experienced as a kid where everyone was seeing these movies that were coming out. And so, all of the quotes and the images were out in the zeitgeist of popular culture, and everyone could kind of relate to that. Even if you hadn't seen the movie, you know that it's about this and it has this quote and this character and this actor, and everyone's kind of aware of that and seeing the same things. And the more prominent the internet became, and it kind of starts tampering that down, where there's not so much a monoculture, and it's somehow, this isn't necessarily an answer, but it's more of an observation of somehow these MCU movies tapped into that same sort of thing where everyone really was enjoying knowing about this same universe and talking about the same jokes that the characters were making, talking about what might happen next in the next movie or the next Avengers movie or whatever. And there was something that had been out there in the culture before that was kind of being brought back with the MCU as it relates to like film and how film resonates in popular culture. And I thought that was really interesting. And it's weird because it was all around this thing that, maybe 15 years before would have been like, that's just nerdy stuff.
It is so bizarre to me that everybody knows who Groot is. That's
Yes.
just, I mean, like,
or
15
Thanos, or
oh man, I don't remember if I talk about this in the book, but I remember as a kid reading Infinity Gauntlet #1, which ends with Thanos snapping half of reality, and I'm like 13 years old reading it when it's brand new, and just being like, I can't believe that just happened. Half of the universe is gone. And I remember walking out of my bedroom, and my younger brother, who's wonderful but is not a nerd, he likes sports, was just like, whatever. And my parents were like, we'll pray for you. And then watching Infinity War and getting that scene, and like everybody that was weirdly validating for me, where I was like, yeah, you get it. Thanos is crazy.
Yeah, I love that.
Hello again. Do you know how you can really support the show for free in just a few minutes or less? That's right. Just leave a rating and review on Spotify and Apple, or wherever you listen that might allow for ratings and reviews. These really help the visibility of the podcast. In fact, just hit that pause button right now and drop the review right now. And then you can get back to the show. I'd greatly appreciate it. Okay. I trust that you went and left that rating and review now. Back to the show.
Here's the big question, though.
Uh-oh.
What is the best superhero movie?
Spider-Man 2.
That's fair. I can accept that answer.
The other possibility is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
I think that is what I currently have up at the top. I remember I saw that in theaters and was like blown away. And to me, it's, I don't know, that one, and even the newer Spider-Verse movie. They're both. It expanded on it somehow, which I thought was not very possible. But really, really incredible, just like artistically and story, like tapping in. It was kind of, I guess maybe it's a little bit because it was refreshing to see a real Spider-Man story and not a a Spider-Man needing a surrogate father in Tony Stark's story.
Yeah.
It was just refreshing to have a real Spider-Man story.
It's interesting that you say that because it's not about Peter Parker, which is
Right.
And you're not wrong. Like going into that first Spider-Verse movie, I was like, this is going to be a train wreck. Like I like Miles Morales,
Right.
but he's not Peter Parker. And also you're going to do a multiverse story and it's animated and it's just too much. It's going to turn people off. And somehow it is beautiful and thoughtful and really a Miles Morales story.
I cry in those movies.
Yes.
But
Spider-Man 2 is still better, I think, because Sam
That's
Raimi
fair.
is a king. So
That's very fair. Totally acceptable.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. I was curious what you might say. I didn't know if you were gonna like pull some like movie that I'd never heard of out.
I mean, I've got I for like a year and a half leading up to the book, I did rankings of all the superhero movies on TikTok. And so I've seen them all.
Yeah.
And strangely, that got me like, even though I'm an old fat guy in his 40s, that got like a lot of traction. And so there were people furious with me for some of my rankings.
Hey, that's the best content. If you can get people mad at you,
I don't know. I'm a little over it.
because if there's people mad at you, there's also people that are like totally on board. And so,
I don't need either one. I don't think.
No, nobody needs it.
What would you say? Would you say Into the Spider-Verse is probably the best?
Yeah. Into the Spider-Verse, and I kind of have Across the Spider-Verse right up there with it, and I'm really, really hoping Beyond the Spider-Verse, whenever it eventually, hopefully comes out, will wrap up things and not ruin it all.
Boy, I hope so.
Man, I mean, before that, it would be hard not to say The Dark Knight.
Dark Knight's great, yeah.
Just, I was ripe age for a movie like that when it came out. And then like my more like, who nobody would even think of this movie when you say a superhero movie, but I really love is Unbreakable.
Oh yeah, Unbreakable's great.
It's like my favorite non-comic book superhero movie by far. So
yeah.
What's the best MCU movie? That's the real question, because neither of us have even said an MCU movie.
Black Panther. I don't think it's close.
How we're on the same page?
Really?
That's my favorite MCU movie.
Yeah. That movie's another miracle, which makes me so mad that they biffed the sequel so badly.
Yeah. To be fair, losing your lead actor had a lot. There's a lot of weight on that character, and Boseman playing him was a big deal. Mm-hmm. So to be fair, it was really set up to fail once they decided to go forward with it after he passed. But
I disagree. I'm going to push on that because one of I think the miracles of Black Panther is the first movie had such a great community. Mm-hmm. The unique thing about Black Panther as a superhero, at least in that movie, in the comics he's not so much like this, but in that movie is that movie's all about him learning from everybody else. He starts out that film as kind of a spoiled prince who the first thing we see him do is disrupt Nakia's operation because he wants to ask her out on a date, right?
Yeah.
Like, and he goes through the entire movie with everybody else, including Killmonger, which you asked me, it's Heath Ledger's Joker and Michael B. Jordan's Killmonger are like the two great villain performances.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
I switch on any day. But so what I'm getting at is, yes, his loss is felt. I mean, and you have to acknowledge that, just what that meant as a performer, a character. But that movie the sequel was so well set up because it gave us so many characters that we love. And instead, it spends so much time with Julia Louis-Dreyfus and I can think of the character name, Everett McGill. I can't think of the actor's name, Martin Freeman. It spends so much time with them, and then it introduces Ironheart and introduces Namor. Like, what are you doing? I mean, and Letitia Wright was a lot of fun in the first movie. She doesn't have quite the gravitas, I don't think. And then you push, you got like one scene with Winston Duke. What are you doing?
Yeah.
That man should be all over that movie. Danny Gorai should be all over the movie.
Mm-hmm.
It was such a, it was like the one movie that could have, I thought, absorbed and done something with the fact that you're losing your lead actor.
Yeah.
And instead, it just does everything that irritates us about Marvel movies, where it's just like, we're going to set up all of these other things instead of telling the story.
Instead of sitting in the grief of that.
And it starts out sitting in the grief.
It starts out really good.
Away from that. So frustrating.
Oh man.
I'm so excited for what Ryan Coogler has next.
He's doing I saw the preview the other day. Sinners.
Yeah, Sinners, that's right.
Yeah.
That's great. Love Ryan Coogler.
It looks
see what he has next.
Very interesting. So I think the Creed is very good, I think.
Creed is still my favorite Rocky movie, and I grew up with the originals. So that movie is...
I think the original is still my favorite, but Creed is probably second.
Yeah.
Pretty close second, probably.
It's astounding. That movie is... I always think about how that came out like right around the same time as The Last Jedi. It both are like seventh entries in franchises that started in the late 70s. And you look at, it could have been the last, and I don't hate The Last Jedi, or not Last Jedi, Force Awakens. And I don't hate Force Awakens, but Force Awakens is safe and lazy in a lot of ways. That's what Creed could have been.
It could have, yeah.
And instead, it's this amazing, it gets a fantastic performance out of Stallone. Jordan is electric. And then you get that one-shot fight scene that is just perfectly orchestrated, and it's so like allergic to just playing the hits that it saves the Bill Conti score, which is amazing, until a snippet at the very end when Adonis has to get back up again, and then it goes to the dun 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 dun. It's
yeah.
I mean, just what smart filmmaking.
Are boxing movies superhero movies? That's the question.
I mean, yes.
Sort of.
As long as they're not Raging Bull, yes.
That's true, yeah.
That's a super villain movie.
Yes. Well, awesome. Do you have a favorite superhero? That's a fun question.
Okay. You're going to regret this question.
Oh, man. Oh, no.
The best superhero is Spider-Man. Like,
okay.
Easily. He's the best. My favorite superhero is a Green Lantern named Guy Gardner, who is he's going to be in the new Superman movie, portrayed by Nathan Fillion, so people will have heard of him by then. But I'm staring right now at a signed comic book, signed by Joe Stanton with Guy Gardner. The Green Lanterns are.
Is Guy Gardner the one that's in Blackest Night?
They're the comic book crossover. Yeah, he's in there.
Okay.
They're all the lanterns are in there.
Okay. I've read it, but it's been a while.
I don't think Black Knight is very good, so you're all right for getting it.
Yeah,
he's in there though, but he's I like him the best when he is an arrogant loser, because I think that there's genuine pathos to the fact that it's a power fantasy. And here's a guy that keeps tripping over himself with his power. I find that endlessly interesting. So he's my favorite, but Spider-Man's the best, then Superman, then Batman, but
sure,
my actual favorite.
I feel like Superman gets a bad rap.
Oh yeah,
but he's a very interesting character usually. My personal favorite is the Flash.
Oh, good.
I love the Flash. I love all the if I had to pick like a science, it would be physics. And so
Yeah.
all the like the physics behind all of his stuff is interesting. And then I really like my favorite comic book arc is Flashpoint.
Okay. We might have some words about this then.
That's fine, but I just really enjoyed that story.
Yeah, what'd you like about it?
Um, I think so. So there are a lot of like shoot offs of it, and I don't even think I've read any or many of those. But the main just Flashpoint story, I don't know if it's. I think it's fun to imagine like what would happen, you know, if he went back and changed everything. I think it's interesting, delving into your past and how your past makes you what you are. And I guess like also dealing with like grieving your past in a healthy way where, it starts off with him grieving it in an unhealthy way of like, let me just go back and fix it instead of like really actually trying to face it. And at the end, he really has to actually face like that grief and go back and put things right. So just all of those things, I just think it's a really moving story.
That's really lovely.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew this. The Flashpoint got burdened with rebooting the entire DC universe, and so
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
it's hard for me to separate that a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm a very mild
Okay.
like DC fan, and so
Okay.
like when I read a graphic novel, it's just like I'm just jumping in and reading this story for what it is standalone. I just like I'm unaware of all the other stuff that it might be connected to.
So
so that probably
enjoy
helps.
what's in front of you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really lovely the way that you describe that.
Yeah. I really did not like what the Flash movie did with that story. I hated it. But yeah,
that movie was interesting.
yes.
You mentioned you haven't read any of the spin-offs. If I can throw out a recommendation, check out the Batman spin-off
Okay.
from Flashpoint. It's only like 3 issues. They end up doing that Batman character and any other things, but the original one I think it's written by Brian Azzarello and penciled by Eduardo Risso. That's really good.
Okay.
The art's really fantastic, and it's an interesting, kind of deals with grief in an interesting way. So maybe check that one out if you're a fan of the Flashpoint.
Yeah, the whole Thomas Wayne thing is fun, and I was hoping that's what they were going to do with Michael Keaton, but they ruined a great opportunity to have Michael Keaton back as Batman, which he was fun in the movie.
He was having fun.
Yeah. And so sometimes I just enjoy seeing actors have fun in movies. So I enjoyed his parts. But yeah.
Michael Keaton's always fun to watch.
Oh, yeah.
Even when he's but I would have said that about Michael Shannon as well. And he looks like he's got a gun to his head the entire movie.
I forgot he's even in it, to be honest.
So did he.
Yeah. I guess moving on from superheroes, you had mentioned that, and we'll just touch briefly on this because I know you. Well, it's getting late for both of us for one thing, but also, the way you talked about it when I was asking you what we might talk about was that you're really just getting going on it. So, but you had mentioned that you're starting to work on a project dealing with police in film. Yeah, what is that? What is your endeavor there?
So it is in the early stages. I'm putting together the proposal, and for those that don't know, to write a nonfiction book, you write basically the first 2 chapters as well as a detailed proposal. So I'm both kind of more into it than you'd think and less into it than I feel great about. But it's going to be at least the way that I'm pitching it now, it's going to be a history of police in film and television in the United States. And my central question is, how did we go from when the first uniformed police departments were introduced in the United States in the 1830s? There was a great deal of skepticism and resentment towards them because it was a standing army policing American citizens.
Yeah.
And if you've read the Declaration of Independence, that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
And so how did Americans go from that to where we are today, where not only do we take it as standard, but we fear that we will be in danger if we don't have a uniformed police, despite the fact that these are just statistics. I mean, I have my political views, but these are just statistics that they don't really solve crimes or even create safer spaces. How did we go from that? And the answer that, of course, I'm going to come to is movies and television. And so my book will trace from the first depiction of police in motion pictures, which is in an Edison, a 30-second Thomas Edison directed comedy bit in 1896 up through, now Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and kind of trace the evolution of these depictions of police.
Gotcha.
I'm writing the silent era and the noir era chapters right now. So in the silent era, it's a lot of Keystone Cops, where police are buffoons.
Yeah. I'm thinking of Buster Keaton's movie Cops.
Yep.
Which they are buffoons. Yeah.
They are, and Keaton is not nearly as, and that short is interesting because like it all plays with a bomb threat, which the Haymarket riot is tied directly to that. I mean, Americans are terrified about anarchists and communists throwing bombs at people as much as they are. And that's interesting because Keaton is such a apolitical filmmaker as opposed to Chaplin, who is, and you watch Modern Times, you watch City Lights, you watch Easy Street is the one where he becomes a cop. They're engaging with this, but at the same time, you've got D.W. Griffith and especially Edison and his folks that are making plays to respectability by doing what we would call today propaganda. Life in the Day in the Life of a Police Officer by Edwin S. Porter is just like, here's a police officer with his family. Here's him walking the beat. Here's how he's helping people. And so what you see in the silent era is kind of, for the cheap seats, is a lot of cops are buffoons oppressing poor people. And those like Griffith, who are trying to go for cinema as a respectable art, are playing a lot more of the police are respectable. And then you go into the noir era, right after that, the noir movies that are made that are very like shades of gray, where this is 54, so it's kind of late in the era, but it's a good example. You get something like Fritz Lang's The Big Heat, where you got I'm blanking on, it's so late right now. The star of that movie, who I can picture and could read off his credits, but I can't think of his name right now. Who is like a on the line cop. That's the whole thing. Is the femme fatale Gloria Graham gonna get him to go over to the baddies, or is he gonna stay with his brunette safe wife at home? There's so many of them are playing with that, and it's not until you get Dragnet coming on TV, jumping from radio and TV in the 1950s, that you really kind of get the idea of the professionalized police, which is happening in relationship to Christopher Wilson, who is the Berkeley chief of police, who is sending these scripts to Jack Webb. And so, anyway, I'm rambling. It's it's a really interesting sort of relationship between historical reality, pop culture, and then the way that pop culture influences the way we interpret reality. That's what I hope to cover in the book. It's going to be huge. I've watched maybe like 3 episodes of Law and Order in my life, and so in order to do this properly, I have to watch all 200 and some odd. So
Yeah.
I still got a lot of work ahead of me. But,
Yeah.
but that's where we're at.
Yeah, that's very cool. And very interesting. I'm as you were like explaining it, I'm like, I would definitely read a book like this. So, hopefully other people would too. And it's not just, I'm not so vain as to think you should write a book just for me. But
well, my last book killed superhero movies, so
Yeah.
even if nobody reads it, I will have killed American Police. So
hey,
the institution, not the people.
Right.
Not the people. I would like the people to be all very much alive.
Well,
The institution
hey,
to go away.
who knows? Who knows what could happen? That's anything is possible, I guess. Maybe. I
Make
don't
sure
know.
you're sending your hate mail to me, not to Eli. This is not his fault.
Well, that's very cool. I am very interested, and that's a whole nother that we're not going to get into because we need to wrap up. That's a whole nother exercise in examining film, because that's not like watching movies and coming in a conversation with movies so much as it is looking at trends through movie history.
Yeah.
And how that kind of relates to the culture, which is another very interesting way to engage with film.
Yeah,
which is cool. So yeah, you really get kind of going from one endeavor with analyzing film to a totally different one. So
I don't like sleep.
Yeah.
So here we
Yeah.
are.
Sleep, Schmeat, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's been great having you on. I guess to wrap it up, do you have just kind of a fun wrap up? Do you have like a movie that you've seen recently? Maybe it could be an old movie, could be one from this year that you think people should see because you thought it was really great.
Oh gosh, yeah. If you haven't seen, if you don't watch Buster Keaton movies, yeah, you should watch Cops. It's
on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. Any Buster Keaton, you really can't go wrong. But Cops is like it's a one reeler, so it's like 15 minutes.
Mhm.
And it's hilarious. And
It is.
even if you don't jive with my political feelings, he's an amazing stuntman, and
Yeah.
he does hilarious gags. So yeah, pull up Cops on YouTube and have some fun with some Keaton.
Yeah. Yeah, and then just follow a rabbit hole and keep clicking on the whatever Keaton movie's next. He's one of my favorites. I realized yesterday that it's the 100th anniversary of Sherlock Jr., which is one of my just favorites, just all time. So I'm like, man, I need to pull up Sherlock Jr. and watch that again. Which is easy because it's 45 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's nothing.
But it is legitimately one of those movies that you watch it and you're like, I don't know how he did that. And
Right.
It's so wonderful.
It
that you
is.
can watch a movie from that old, and
100 years old, and you're like, how did he do that?
yeah, it's so delightful. Yeah, just check out Keaton. You'll have a great time.
Yeah, good recommendation. Well, it's been great having you on, Joe. We are both very on the verge of delirium probably right now. So I'm going to call it. We're officially done. Again, we are moving forward with Spielberg next week. I will be covering the Lost World Jurassic Park. I've actually already recorded that episode, so it's a fun one. I'm spoiler more down on it, but my guest really likes it, so fun conversation there. So look forward to that. Joe, why don't you remind people, if they didn't listen last week, where they can follow you on all the things?
All the things is Joe Writes Words, and my website is joewriteswords.com. So send your hate mail there.
Great. Yeah. And the book, where's the best place for people to find the Superpowers and the Glory?
It's probably not going to be on any shelves, but you can tell Barnes and Noble order it, or Amazon, or any of those places. It's around.
Great. Yeah, the typical places you can find it. Yeah, and I'll find maybe a few of those links and put those in the episode description if you're interested in reading that. So hopefully you are. Hopefully Joe sold you on it. So I was excited to see that my favorite MCU movie was the first chapter, which is Black Panther. So
yeah,
I'm like that gave me incentive to go ahead and start reading, because I was like, oh, the first chapter is my favorite. So there you go. But that's all we have for this week. I've been Eli Price for Joe George. You've been listening to The Establishing Shot. We will see you next time.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.